back, relax, and let's have a chapter chat. I'm your host, Jessica Foster. Today, we are joined by author Lisa C. I have been reading one of Lisa's books, Lady Tan's Circle of Women. This is your latest release. It came out about a year ago, correct?
The hardcover came out almost 2 years ago, but the paperback came out about a year ago. And people are still reading it like crazy. It's a wonderful thing to experience as a writer, that your book has legs and people keep talking about it to their friends. And so it spreads by word of mouth.
And this one takes place during the Ming Dynasty. And this is a female physician, which was not something that you would typically see during that time period.
No, well, I don't know how many people know when the Ming Dynasty took place. So she was working in the 1400s. And so 500 years ago, and when she turned 50, in 1511, she published a book of her medical cases. So if you think about that for a second, late 1400s, how many doctors were there in the world at all? And then you add to that she'd written a book that is still in print today. And the reason it's still in print is because so many of her treatments in traditional Chinese medicine are still used. That was just an extraordinary thing, because if we think about how many books are still in print, like I said, today, from before that time period, you have the Bible, you have the Iliad and the Odyssey, you have some Greek tragedies and comedies, all of those written by men, by the way. Every once in a while, there's something written by a woman, Tales of Genji from Japan, and Hildegard von Bingen's work in Austria. But these are very, very few and far between. And again, for these books to still be in print is such a miracle, really, no matter who wrote them, that we have access to them, 500, 2,000 years later.
How did you stumble upon this story and decide to make it into a historical fiction novel?
So you have to scroll back in time to my last book. Well, I guess actually the first thing you should know is that I think about books for a very long time before I decide this is the one. The one I just finished, 30 years I'd been thinking about it. Tea-Grill of Hummingbird Lane, 20 years. Island of Sea Women, 8 years. Anyway, scroll back in time now about 6 years. I had finished Island of Sea Women. I went out on book tour for it. And then I came home and started doing some of the research for a book that I'd been thinking about for 10 years. A few months go by. It's time for the paperback of Island of Sea Women to come out. I'm supposed to go out for 6 weeks to promote the book. I left on March 10th, 2020. And so I went to 5 states in 5 days, and then the tour was ended. I was sent home, the country shut down, and then the world shut down. And remember when we all heard it was just going to be 2 weeks at home? And it turned out to be something a little different. And so that you would think in a way that this would be a great opportunity for a writer, that you'd be at home, no distractions, could completely focus. But that other idea, I needed to go to libraries, to research libraries, to archives, and of course, to China. All of them closed. So I couldn't do it. I couldn't work on it. And I have to say, I didn't handle that time very well. Here I was, home alone with my husband, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, in the first week, we spent more time together than I think we had in about the previous 3 years, just like nonstop. And like I said, I just didn't handle it very well. And I did some of the things that other people did. I cleaned out the closets and stuff like that. But really, I was at very loose ends. So anyway, here I was, home alone with my husband and just puttering around. And there was one day I was walking by this wall of books, and you can see all around me, these are all my research books in this room. And I was walking by here, and the spine of one of them jumped out at me. And I don't know why, because it was a gray jacket with slightly darker gray lettering. but it was like it jumped off the shelf and into my hands. Reproducing Women, Pregnancy and Childbirth in the Ming Dynasty. It's kind of interesting. I opened it up and I realized that I had had that book on my shelf for 10 years. Not only had I never read it before, I had never even opened it before. Anyway, I thought to myself, well, here we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Well, I don't know what else to do. So I sat down right over there and I started reading. And I got to page 19, and there was a mention of this woman doctor 500 years ago who'd written a book. It's kind of interesting. And I came over here, looked her up and discovered that her book was still in print, not just in Chinese, but also in English. And although I am a huge, huge, huge supporter of independent bookstores, on that day I may have ordered from Amazon, and I had it 24 hours later. And so instead of thinking about this for, years and years, it was all of 26 hours.
Wow. And were you just so inspired by this character?
I was completely inspired by her because what she was doing in her time was remarkable. But, she would be remarkable even if if she was living today. But the fact that she did, that she was a doctor, that she had a practice, that she wrote a book, that all of these things, while still maintaining this aspect of being a very traditional Confucian wife. So in those days, Confucius, his beliefs really permeated society, the culture, families. And he was a great philosopher, don't get me wrong, but he had a lot of ideas about women that we might not really enjoy today. So she was married in a very traditional marriage. She had 4 children. She took care of her husband's household. So she gave this appearance of being very traditional. And yet, in many ways, she was quite revolutionary.
She was. And this woman that we're talking about, Lady Tan, in the book, and I'm going to let you pronounce her first name for me, because if you're not listening to the audiobook, our readers may not know how to pronounce it.
Right. So it's Tan Yanxian. And in Chinese, the first name that you read is the family name. So her family name is Tan, and then Yanxian.
And what we're noticing in the book, like you said, there are values during that time period that we do not still have today. And it can be shocking for some readers to read some of this.
She was an elite woman, highly educated. Again, just very extraordinary for her time. But she was still, traditional. And so her feet had been bound. And I pulled this out to show in a second, but if you think of an ideal sized bound foot, it's about the size of your own thumb, so about 1 inch wide and 3 inches long. And this was a process that took 2 years, and it started when a little girl was 5 years old, and the toes would be broken, the midfoot would be broken, all of this rolled up almost like a sock, so that basically you're walking on your big toe. And so, again, visualize it like a thumb or your big toe. And here is a bound foot shoe. So you can see how that would have fit on someone's foot. The thing about this practice was that many, many girls died during the actual foot binding. They would get an infection. There were no antibiotics back then. So they would get infections, get gangrene, things like that. So about 10% died. But this had an effect on you as a grown woman. I mean, just again, think of yourself and all the things that you do just day to day, but you'd be walking basically only on your big toes. And so women's legs, the muscles atrophied. They were very unsteady on their feet. If somebody bumped them, they could tip over very easily, break a bone, break a hip. But also, even as an adult, you had to take care of these feet in very special ways. Otherwise, again, you could get an infection. And so this was a lifelong, something that they lived with for their entire lives. And I wanted to, and I've written about foot binding before in some of my other books, in Snowflower and the Secret Fan, really from the perspective of a little girl having it done to her. In Peony and Love, what it would be like to be a mother who had been through the process herself, then doing that to her child. And then in this book, what those effects would be, as an adult, as you're going through your life, all the way into old age, and what were the dangers that women had to face and just live with every day as they were going about their lives.
And the way that you describe it in the book, you can visualize it. And just the way that you described the women walking on their bound feet, it really was mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's, well, I think let me just put it to you this way, in a different way. I once early with that first book, with Snowflower and the Secret Fan, a young woman in my agent's office wrote to me and said, I don't think you're being critical enough of this practice. And I wrote her back, and this has come up every once in a while, like, why don't I come out against foot binding? And I see my approach is very different in my books. I'm not trying to do a criticism of society. What I want to do is be in the room with those people, to be in their shoes, so that readers, can really experience what that life was like, that you're not up here looking down, that you're actually in their clothes, in their shoes, as you're turning the pages.
And you have done that so successfully. In fact, one of my coworkers who is reading this book along with me, she said, I almost feel like I'm reading someone's diary.
I want it to feel intimate, but I mean that in the sense of a real connection to these people. That, again, it's not like you're observing them on TV. It's like you're there in the room with them.
And you can feel that. It makes your reader connect with it so much. And your connection with Chinese history and the culture, this goes back to your family.
Yes, that's right. I know I don't look it, but I come from a very large Chinese American family. My great-great-grandfather came to work on the building of the railroad. My great-grandfather came and stayed, and he had a total of 4 wives, one of whom was white. And this was back in the 1890s. Here in California, it was against the law for Chinese down to a quarter to marry someone who was white until 1948. It was against the law in 28 states, most of them out here in the West. And the last of those laws wasn't overturned until 1967. So what my great-grandparents did was they went to a lawyer who drew up a contract between 2 people as though they were forming a partnership. My grandparents went to Mexico to get married, and my own parents were only the second couple in our whole extended family to be legally married in the United States. So, back then, people had a lot of kids. My great-grandfather, 12 children, his brother, 12 children. They all had a ton of children. And eventually they get down to my generation. And of course, there's just so many people. So like I said, when I was a child here in Los Angeles, my Chinese side of the family, there were about 400 people. And there were about a dozen that looked like me, the majority still full Chinese, and then this little spectrum in between. And we would all get together, weddings and funerals, and then this other tradition called the 1-month birthday, when a baby is 1 month old. And there's special traditions that have red eggs and other things, and big banquet. And of course, when people were having so many babies, there were a lot of those every year. And so when I was a little girl and I looked around me, what I saw were Chinese faces. What I experienced was Chinese culture, Chinese tradition, Chinese language, Chinese food. And that's why I write the kinds of books that I do.
And you can tell that you have that deep love and connection too.
Yeah, but I think also, just for me personally, there are things where, and this, again, very personal to me, because of how I look, where do I fit in? How I look versus how I was raised. So where do I fit in? What do I know? What do I not know? And so in many ways, these different books have been, for me, a personal journey, an exploration of that. And when I was working on Peony and Love, that gave me an opportunity to really look at those traditions that I'd kind of taken for granted. And so these books allow me to do that. And what really just humbles me is that there's so many readers who kind of come along on that journey with me.
Well, I think that we're not exposed to it going through college. I mean, I didn't learn a lot about Chinese history.
No. Well, we have a very Eurocentric educational system. I mean, most of us, especially in the old days, came from Europe. And so we have a connection there so that we learn about the kings and queens of England. We learn about the French Revolution. We learn where people came from as they were settling in the 13 colonies. And so it's actually quite natural. However, the country's a lot older now, and people are still coming from many different directions. And of course, the Chinese have been coming to this country for a long time. There were Chinese who fought in the Revolutionary War, who fought in the Civil War, and of course, really helped to settle California and the West Coast. So again, these are not things that we're normally taught. I at least when I was a girl, the only thing that I learned about Chinese American history was that the Chinese worked on the railroad, on the Transcontinental Railroad. And yet there is a lot of other Chinese American history and how the Chinese helped to build the West. And some of that history is quite dark, unfortunately, but also very inspiring.
And as far as you traveling, I know that you could not travel to China for research on this book, but have you traveled for your other novels?
Yes, I have. I've until this book, I had gone to every single place that I'd written about. I always try to eat the foods that the characters eat. I try to really, just as much as I can see all. It's really about the senses. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does the air feel like on your skin? What sounds do you hear? Are there other animals that make different sounds than what we know that help? By using all those senses, again, it helps to immerse me in the story, but I hope that readers feel that as well. But with this book, the world had shut down. I wasn't going anywhere. And I had to approach the research in a completely different way. And one of the things I did was I just started reaching out directly to different scholars. And the first person I looked for was the woman who had translated Tan Yan-shen's book, Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor, into English. And, looking on the internet, and I'm looking at them, and she could have been anywhere in the world. I'm thinking, well, just anywhere. She could have been anywhere. And it turned out that once I found her, that she lived in Santa Monica, about 10 minutes from where I live. Now, it was still so early in the pandemic, we couldn't meet in person, but we did meet on Zoom about 3 times a week. She would send me academic articles and medical journals about Chinese medicine, about Tan Yan-shen, about childbirth during the Ming Dynasty. She introduced me again through Zoom to different scholars. And then there's another professor down at the University of California at Irvine, which is down in Orange County, who I have reached out to on occasion. And so if I would get stuck on something, I would write to him and say, do you know anybody who knows this? Something like, and I'll just give you an example. There's the moment when Tan Yuen-shen is on the boat on the Grand Canal, and she's going from her hometown of Wuxi up to the Forbidden City. And the way she's left home, and this isn't giving too much away, she's pregnant. She and her husband are not getting along, and she's making this big journey at a long time ago. And I just felt like if I were her, I would want to write a letter home to my husband. Well, did they have a postal system in the Ming Dynasty?
No.
So this turned out to be very, very, very hard to find. And finally, I reached out to Professor Wasserstrom, who put me in contact with a professor in British Columbia who had spent the last 10 years researching, you guessed it, the postal system of the Ming Dynasty. And so what had taken me hours and hours to find, then that professor sent me these articles that he'd written on the history of the postal system in the Ming Dynasty. And it turned out she would not have been able to write a letter. So in the book, it ends up as like one line. I wished I could have written my husband a letter, but I couldn't because I'm not the emperor.
And it just shows the meticulous research that goes into this novel.
Yeah, and to me, it's fascinating. I love the research part. I never know what I'm going to find. I do it all myself. To me, it's like a big treasure hunt, and it's just, I don't know what I'm going to find. And maybe just even hearing a description of some of the things I was reading, unpublished dissertations, medical journals. Some of it is really, what can I say? Dry. We'll just say dry. Sometimes I think, I don't even think that person's mother read this. And then I'll be turning the pages, and then all of a sudden I'll come across something. One is the story of the worm, a message that's written on the baby's foot, and what happens to the midwife and the Forbidden City. All of those things happened to real people. And, but I'll just say, like, when I came across, and I'd been like turning pages and turning, when I came across that story of the worm, I'm going to use that. And then for me, it's a matter of, well, where does it come in the story? Is it the beginning, the middle, or the end? Why is it there? What's the ripple effect? And so that's what I love, about the research is, first of all, I'm learning all kinds of things that I didn't know before. I mean, I learned an awful lot about Chinese medicine.
Well, you kept me turning the pages, and you have another book that's coming out next summer, and you said you just turned it in, right?
I did. It's just right behind me on a shelf here. I just turned it in a week ago Sunday. Daughters of the Sun and Moon. And it starts in 1870 in China, but then comes to Los Angeles. Chinese women who come to Los Angeles. And I can just tell you that Los Angeles in 1870, only 5,000 people. By contrast, San Francisco was already 150,000 people. It was a quite isolated little pueblo, very dirty, very small, and extraordinarily violent. And of the 5,000 people, there were 180 Chinese, and of that 180, 34 were Chinese women. And so this novel is based on or inspired by 3 real women who came here at that time.
Well, we are so looking forward to that. We've got a ways to wait on that one. But in the meantime, we have plenty of your other historical fiction novels to read. Lisa, thank you for spending time with us today. You've been listening to Chapter Chat. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Happy reading!